Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. In our last video, we talked to Greg about his credentials, who he is and what experiences can he draw on to debate issues such as politics and international affairs. We covered a number of points in that video, which we entitled Part 1, and we continue them here in Part 2. So we shall move where Greg last left off. We hope you enjoy listening.
I suppose I've clocked up something like somewhere in excess of 50 countries that I've visited and or lived in for prolonged periods of time. When I left South Africa, eventually, I went to South America, wandered around Brazil fairly extensively, from Iguazu to some time in Manaus, Palavelo, Capo Grande, Rio, Mato Grosso, and the like, and then on to Venezuela, which amusingly was supposedly a democracy at the time, though I've never seen another democracy that had such well-armed traffic officers doing point duty. There were machine guns on every corner. It was not a pleasant area to live in for any period of time, particularly areas like Caracas. I always felt with Venezuela that as a country, it was founded on the piracy out of the Gulf of Maracaibo, and it had only changed to being oil piracy in the Gulf of Maracaibo in the modern world. I then traveled up through the Caribbean islands, Curacao, Aruba, and on up the chain, and arrived in America, did nearly 100,000 miles in a hired car. We hired a car and drove around America. One has to drive Route 66. I did. I then drove all the way back on the southern route, dropped down into, having been from Colorado across the Rockies, Utah, Nevada, spent some time in Phoenix, Arizona, New Mexico, and across that route, the Texas Panhandle, wandered around in the middle, and then to the East Coast, and a little bit of time in Washington, on up to New York, and then flew back to Britain.
Well, Greg, if I stop you there a second.
Yeah.
So you've been involved in a number of businesses of your own. Then you also worked for a firm on commission only and so on. You've made money, but you've also lost it as well, which is quite a lesson everyone should perhaps learn. Lost it in the sense that you were probably extravagant and just wasted it on wine, women and song, I'm assuming.
No. I would love to quote you George Best.
Go on.
I invested in wine, women and song.
All right.
And I wasted it on things that were only done for pleasure. But I had, one of the advantages of my life is I've had fairly long periods of retirement during various points in my life, rather than waiting until I was old and doddery and couldn't enjoy it. I had a period retired when I was about 28. I had a couple of years retired when I was in my 30s. It's a much better way to do it, in my opinion.
I met you in early 2000s because we won't go into the parties and so on, but I was involved in politics as well as banking and finance. And by that time, you had established quite a relationship in politics, in the background at least. So how did you sort of move from being, if you like, an international businessman to the world of politics and books, because that's another interest you and I both have?
Basically, my father was, during his Air Force time, was very much involved during the period that I was old enough to understand what he was doing, which was from about 1957, when I was 11 years old, on through to 1967, as a rough guide. My father was heavily involved in international military intelligence within the British Air Force, and being relatively senior in years, was involved in a number of interesting, shall we say, escapades.
Do you wish to go into any detail on that, Greg?
I think in that I was living with somebody who was very close to the cutting edge in the Cold War, it would be something of a breach of confidence to discuss any detail. But suffice to say that my father was still flying. He was involved in measurement of rapid response by Cold War enemies, which was a matter, amongst other things, of encroachment on Russia's borders to see how fast they could get their MiGs into the air, much the same as Russia does with Britain nowadays, bringing battleships close to our coast and flying over the country on the very edge of our airspace in the Russian Bears to test what is airworthy response time. That was one aspect of what he was doing. So I was very aware of the Cold War. I was very aware of what was going on. And I took an interest, a very possibly advanced interest, from about the age of 13 or 14. Though I remember on one occasion when I was 11 walking into my father's office in Singapore, somewhat unannounced. I was out exploring something or other. And as I recall, we were at Changi Air Force Base near the notorious Changi Rock, which was where literally hundreds of people were slaughtered by firing squads, Japanese firing squads during the war. And they executed prisoners of war and the like on Changi Rock, standing in front of Changi Rock. And I arrived at my father's place of work, and I said to his flight sergeant, his father around, he said, yeah, he's in a meeting with so-and-so. He'll be back in 10 minutes. Go and wait in his office. So I went into his office, and the flight sergeant obviously didn't realize there were two terrorists, communist insurgents, both dead, tied upright in chairs in the office where my father was getting suitable photographs of them to make posters to show that they were, to put around the kampongs in Malaya to show that these two terrorists were no longer functioning quite as well as they used to. And that was as an 11-year-old. So yeah, I've had a fairly interesting life. Yes, I've always been interested in politics. People will say to you, I don't discuss politics, and to which my standard response is, oh, tell me, how have you worked out how to get out of paying income tax? And they look a bit blank. And you say, well, it's utterly dependent on politics and which of the idiots you've seen voted in recently. They determine your taxation. They determine the direction of your life. And you're telling me you take no interest in it. Sorry, I don't believe you can be that stupid.
No, and I would agree with that. Greg, if I were to ask you where on the political spectrum you would say that you stood, what answer would you give?
Autism. Definitely on the spectrum. To be a little more serious, I really don't mind which country in the world I would be called on to vote in. I would vote for the same principles, those of social care, socialism, and the landed, educated employers. Now, in Britain, that makes me a conservative, because in the whole of my political awareness, the Conservative Party has been the only socialist party in Britain. And that's socialism with a small s. It has provided for people. It has always taken an interest in the well-being of people, but not just jingoistically, which unfortunately those who call themselves socialists with a capital S tend to be jingoistic. Any fool can promise minimum wages and bankrupt a country in buying votes. It is frequently more responsible to keep people in work and ensure that you have money in the piggy bank to actually pay your bills. we have seen time and again the Socialist Party, with a capital S, in Britain, enjoy a period in power, leaving the country virtually on the verge of bankruptcy, and notoriously at the end of the 13 years, the unlucky 13 years of socialist governance by Blair, Brown, and that gang of, in my opinion, crooks. There was the notorious note left in the Treasury Office for the incoming Conservative government, which said, "There's no money left." How very true of the outcome of most socialist dogma governments. Now, I would look at any country in the world and I would say, who owns the industry? Who commands respect as leaders? Who is socialist with a small s, providing the maximum social benefits for people? And who have the skills? And you will find it's exactly the same people in every country. And those are the ones I would vote for on the basis they are the ones who drive capitalism, and capitalism provides all of the jobs except the parasites who are hanging on as advisors and all the quasi jobs surrounding socialist governments. I hope that answers that question.
It does. But interestingly, though, if you were an American, I suppose you'd be probably on the left wing of the Republican Party then. Would that be right? Rather than the hard right of the Republican Party?
I would be on the extreme wing of the Democrats, on the left wing of Republican. In other words, I'd actually, in America, probably be a liberal in the middle. Because I find the extremes of the Republican Party to be obscene. And I find the extremes in the other direction of the Democrats to be well-meaning, but just as obscene. And we no longer have left and right-wing politics. We have politics which is a circle, where the position in the middle is probably the best place to be, as the left wing of the one party marries up to the right wing of the other.
Okay, Greg, this has been a fascinating interview and we have to bring it to a close. But before we do, and I certainly would like us to have a discussion really on politics in the near future, particularly when one considers that, without going into it now, that the current president of the United States is a Republican, and yet the national debt has risen under him in only a few short years, arguably far greater than I suspect any other president in history. But we'll talk about that again. But you're 74. Where do you lie now? How are you spending your time? Are these now your halcyon days, or are these just days spent counting towards your eventual descent into Armageddon?
I have absolutely no fear of dying. I never have had. I put my life under extreme risk on many occasions, often assisting others. My sports have always been what I think we can safely call death sports. I'm not remotely interested in nice, comfortable sports like playing bat and ball. I played rugby to quite a serious level as a youngster. I pole vaulted, which is astonishing for the build I have, because pole vaulters are normally made out of pipe cleaners, whereas I'm fairly heavy built, and implausible as it may seem now, was fairly muscular. Now time has taken its toll, so has hard living and good living. I've confronted death in many ways. Rock climbing was one of my great interests. I was climbing some of the household name North Walls when I was 16, 17. I've climbed with a few household name climbers. I've also enjoyed other similar sports. I used to ride quite a lot. And no, I'm pleased to say, the maturity to realize that this doesn't last forever. I have to confront the fact that I'm no longer capable of doing these things, and it doesn't really bother me because I've always been aware of it. It was the Abbot of Downside said on one occasion that at a parents' speech day, that you may think that we charge a great deal for educating your children, but some of them seem not to have gained the education you might have hoped. He said, our aim in terms of educating is to educate your children to the fact that they are not immortal, and to confront the realities of their life, not the dreams they wish they had that only makes them miserable. So it doesn't worry me. I've also confronted extreme problems with health. I've had repeated bouts of cancer since 1997. I've had something like 14 operative procedures. I've had heavy duty chemo, radiotherapy. I then decided I'd had enough of urology and oncology, and so I thought I'd test a different department, and I had a massive heart attack, only to find that I do not have a right coronary artery. It's blocked from end to end. You can't put a bypass in, and it's impossible to stent. So I take this fistful of pills a day, and I'm still here annoying people, so what do I care? I am likely to go with a heart attack with no warning at all, and I see that as an infinitely better option from both my point of view and that of my wife than I sink into a sort of glorified delirium tremens of Alzheimer's or something equally as ghastly. It becomes interesting. You confront the fact that I do know with some certainty that at 74, within the next 6 years, 7, maybe 8, the party's going to be over. But it doesn't worry me.
Well, on that happy note, Greg, all that I will ask is that you don't pass away too soon, otherwise I'll have no one to talk to on this channel. And being the ever charitable person that I am, I wish you a long life.
I thank you kindly.
Greg, thank you very much.
My pleasure. And that must have bored everybody rigid.
Well, we'll soon find out, because I'll be able to tell how long they listened to this talk for. Thank you, Greg.
Indeed.
We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles, and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.